I'd been leading the Midwest Landstone account for nearly 7 years. Top client, my crown jewel. It wasn't just numbers and spreadsheets for me. I'd put my sweat into this, built trust with every call, every meeting. So, when Ed Summers, my boss, walked by my cubicle after the board meeting, I didn't expect what he said next. He leans over, grinning like he just cracked the code on world peace, and says, "Don't worry about Thursday's site visit. Trent will be taking the lead from here. He's ready." Trent. Ed's 27-year-old son, fresh out of a management workshop, wearing more confidence than experience. I didn't even blink, just handed over my work phone, the one that had my entire history with Landstone stored in it. "Everything's in there," I said. He nodded like he was taking over the world and walked off. I didn't scream, didn't throw a fit, I didn't even protest. I just sat back down, sipped my cold coffee, and started mentally packing up what little trust I still had left in that place. The thing is, I'd already seen this play before. It wasn't about capability, it was about optics. Trent was the shiny new toy, and I was the guy who'd been around long enough to know the cost of too much polish. I'd learned early in this business that the workhorse doesn't get the applause, the show pony does. It had always been like that. But here's the thing. Nobody mentioned any of this to me. No heads up, no conversation. Ed didn't pull me aside and say, "Hey Rick, we think it's time for a change." That would have been too human, too much like respect. Instead, they just let it happen, like I was supposed to be okay with it, but I wasn't. 3 months ago, when Trent first showed up with his fresh perspective and a resume that was mostly PowerPoint slides about synergies and pivoting, I wasn't concerned. I'd been doing this for years. I knew the ropes, I knew the work. Trent, he knew the buzzwords. That's it. It started small, little things like meetings where my name wasn't on the invite, or when I'd show up and the conference room would be full of people I didn't even know. The toner would disappear, and no one would know where it went. His emails always had that shiny corporate tone, full of big words but little substance. And then he'd start copying himself into client threads, not even in a helpful way. More like he was trying to make sure everyone knew he was there. I flagged it once, just a quick note to Ed. "Hey, this isn't the way we do things." Ed laughed it off. "He's just enthusiastic, Rick. Show him the ropes." Yeah, ropes I'd bled tying. I could have said something. I could have fought it, pulled the old "I've been here longer" card. But what was the point? Ed had already made up his mind. And besides, I could already feel the slow burn of being edged out. It's the kind of thing you notice after 7 years. The way you're suddenly invisible in the places where you used to be indispensable. The way people start talking around you, instead of to you. I watched Trent, wide-eyed and eager, slip into my role. Landstone became his new playground, and I was just the ghost hanging around, waiting for my name to disappear completely. That moment when I saw Landstone lead next to his name, and my own erased like I never mattered in the first place, I felt something shift. It wasn't anger, not exactly, more like resignation. I didn't need anyone to tell me what was happening. I knew the game. And the fact that Ed couldn't even be bothered to tell me about it, to have a conversation about the transition, that stung more than anything. So I did what I always did. I shut my mouth and kept working. I kept the clients happy, made the right calls, did the right things. But I wasn't blind. I knew what was happening, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Ed and Trent made the call to take everything I'd built and hand it over to someone who just waltzed in like it was theirs for the taking. When Ed stopped by my cubicle that morning and casually mentioned the site visit was Trent's now, it wasn't the words that hit me. It was the look in his eyes, like I should have been grateful for the handoff. Like it was a promotion for me, a chance to rest and let the new guy handle it. But there was nothing remotely generous about it. I could almost hear the unspoken, "Move aside, Rick. The future's here now." Wednesday, 6:02 p.m. The office was mostly empty, the hum of the overhead lights buzzing in the silence. I was sitting at my desk, nursing a mug of that bitter coffee that had been brewing since 2 Boktuk. It was cold now, but that didn't matter. I needed something to swallow the taste of whatever was happening to me, to this place. The building felt like a tomb, sterile and hollow. Marcus, one of the junior analysts, walked by and shot me a look. "Hey, didn't know you were still on Landstone? Thought Trent took over." I didn't bother answering. I just gave him a nod. No point in explaining anything to someone who wouldn't understand. His words hung in the air for a second, but it didn't matter. I already knew. I found it in the fine print. No third-party liaison without express written consent from both signatories. Calvin and I had signed that agreement in 2020 after a PR disaster nearly tanked Landstone's merger talks. The clause had been my idea, something to safeguard against just this kind of mess. A protection against people like Trent, who didn't understand the weight of those relationships, didn't care about the sweat that went into building them. The whole thing felt like déjà vu. I could practically see the flash of neon lights from the PR nightmare we'd pulled them through back then. A deal on the verge of collapse, a client at risk, and I was the one who kept it together. I never needed a thank you. I never asked for a spotlight. I just did what had to be done. But now I was invisible. The trust I'd built, gone with one email. I wasn't going to let this slide. There were rules in place, and Trent had just tripped over one of the biggest ones. My heart didn't race, though. It wasn't anger that I felt. It was just the quiet recognition that things were moving past me. Not because I wasn't capable, but because they didn't care. Because Trent was shiny and new, and I was the guy they were phasing out without even saying goodbye. I grabbed a few more documents, shoved them into a folder, and leaned back in my chair. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but I knew it had to be done quietly. Let them keep walking into their mess. Let them think I was going to just fade into the background, a casualty of corporate turnover. The sound of the fluorescent lights buzzed louder in the silence, and I just sat there, watching the clock tick, knowing tomorrow was going to bring something bigger, something that would finally make them notice. Thursday morning, I watched from my desk as Trent strutted past in a $400 hoodie like he was about to pitch on Shark Tank. He had that look, the one that said, "I'm the next big thing." But he was missing the one thing that actually mattered: substance. Ed called it the transition of the decade, like this was some kind of historical moment, and Trent had natural instincts, as if those instincts weren't just half-baked corporate buzzwords. I watched Ed's glowing smile as he patted Trent on the back, probably thinking he'd just uncovered the next Steve Jobs. Meanwhile, Trent had no clue what CRM even stood for. He thought it meant customer referral money. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I didn't warn him about the NDA either. I didn't feel the need to. He was too busy flexing on Slack and scheduling meetings with people who had no idea who he was, let alone what he was doing. It wasn't my job anymore. So when he sent Calvin that invite to sync on synergies, a phrase that could have been pulled straight out of a bad motivational seminar, I didn't stop him. I knew what was coming. At 10:17 a.m., it hit. The email popped up in my inbox, the subject line simple but heavy: Landstone account question. I clicked it. Calvin had replied directly, "Are you authorized to manage this relationship under our agreement with Richard D. Conroy?" That was me. Calvin had asked the question, sharp and cold, like a scalpel cutting through all the fluff. I didn't even flinch. I'd seen this coming for weeks. What surprised me was the ripple effect. I could almost hear the panic in Ed's office. Phones started ringing. Slack threads exploded. I could hear the whispers down the hall, but none of it concerned me. It was their mess now, not mine. Legal got involved. They were scrambling to figure out who had the original NDA. I could hear the rush of activity behind the closed doors. I stayed silent. Just left my Slack icon green, like I was still available for a chat. I could have jumped in. I could have been the hero swooping in with all the answers. But I didn't. They didn't deserve it. Instead, I focused on my folder, letting them walk into their own disaster, blindfolded by ego. Trent had no idea what he'd just done. Ed didn't either. They thought it was all smooth sailing because they had a shiny new face and a pretty pitch. But the thing about contracts is, they don't care about shiny faces. They care about signatures. I watched the scene unfold in slow motion as Ed started to sweat. I could feel the tension building across the office. Ed would try to smooth it over, try to pass the blame, but I wasn't about to be their scapegoat. Not anymore. The phone calls continued. Slack exploded with questions. Who had the NDA? Was Trent authorized? What was the legal risk? And through all of it, I didn't say a word. I just let them drown in their own mess. Trent had crossed a line, and there was no easy way back. I didn't have to lift a finger. They were already on their way to the cliff, too busy patting each other on the back to notice the fall coming. I was content to let them enjoy the ride until they hit the ground. Friday, 9 a.m., sharp. The emergency meeting was called. The subject line had made it sound like some routine check-in. Landstone contract discussion. I was invited to attend, like some sort of last-minute afterthought. There were 4 of them in the room: legal, HR, Ed, and Trent. And then there was me. I slid into the empty chair with a cup of stale coffee in my hand, the quiet tension hanging in the air like fog. I didn't need to say anything. I could feel it in my gut. They knew. I knew. This was the reckoning. The second the video feed clicked on, Calvin's face filled the screen. He didn't waste time, no pleasantries, no small talk, just straight to the point. You breached Clause 4B of the NDA. Effective immediately, we're terminating the agreement. It felt like the room went silent for a solid minute, though it was probably only a few seconds. I didn't even look around. I kept my eyes on Calvin. His words hung in the air like an execution sentence. I could almost hear the collective intake of breath around me. Legal looked like someone had just shot their dog, while Ed tried to compose himself, his hands shaking ever so slightly on the table. The silence felt heavy. My heartbeat was steady, my nerves calm. This was their mess. I wasn't about to play savior. Ed finally cleared his throat, trying to take control of the situation. "Richard was staff," he said, voice wavering. "All NDAs flow to the firm, right? I mean, that's how it works, right?" He looked over at legal, like they were supposed to back him up. But Calvin didn't flinch. He looked right through Ed. "Not this one. Richard signed as individual liaison due to proprietary concerns. That was agreed upon in writing, and notarized." The air went thicker. I could see the color drain from Ed's face. His bluff had been shot down faster than a lead balloon. And then Trent, clueless as ever, finally piped up. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the same overpriced hoodie he wore yesterday, hugging his shoulders like a security blanket. "Wait, so I'm not allowed to talk to them?" he asked, as if it was all some kind of misunderstanding. Calvin didn't even flinch, didn't try to explain. "You voided 6 years of trust with one unauthorized email," he said, his voice cold, final. He didn't have to say more. We all knew the weight of it. The mess Trent had made wasn't a mistake. It was a breach, one that shattered more than just an agreement. The video feed went dead. The call ended. I didn't wait for anyone else to speak. I watched as Ed closed his binder, his face tight, his jaw set like he was trying to keep himself from losing it. The man had aged 5 years in 1 minute. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But I didn't feel anything for Trent. He was too busy looking around like he hadn't just stepped on a landmine. When Ed's eyes shifted toward me, I didn't offer any sympathy. I didn't nod or offer a word of comfort. I just sat there, silently. They were the ones who had made their bed, and now they were lying in it. They could keep trying to find a way out, but there was no undoing this. The damage was done, the trust was gone, and no one was going to patch it up with a handshake. I left that room with the same calm I'd had the whole week. They were still reeling, still scrambling to fix what had been broken, but they didn't have the experience, the history, to know how deep the cut really was. It wasn't just about Landstone anymore. It was about what happened when you took someone who'd been there, who'd bled for the company, and tossed them aside for a shiny new face. It was about what happened when you thought the rules didn't apply to you. And as I walked out of that conference room, the weight of it finally hit me. I'd been right to stay quiet. They were taking care of their own downfall without me lifting a finger. I walked past marketing as I made my way to the elevators. They were whispering, heads bent low, like they were trying to hide a secret. It didn't take long to figure out what they were talking about. One of them had pulled up the slides Trent had shown to the board last week, the ones with the roadmap data in them. Data that had never been cleared for board presentation. It hit me then. Those slides were more than just a bad PowerPoint. They had everything in them. Strategic pricing, confidential IP, the upcoming acquisition of a logistics AI startup. The kind of stuff that had made Landstone's board meetings more exciting than any investor call. Stuff I was trusted with. Stuff I kept in Appendix D of the NDA. The vault. And now, it was out there. Those slides were never meant to be seen by anyone outside the boardroom, much less by someone like Trent, who didn't have the first clue about what he was holding. Ed had used those slides to brag in his board updates. He'd paraded them like trophies, unaware they were ticking time bombs. Now it was exposure, and possibly even worse, insider trading material. The weight of it settled in my chest, heavy. This wasn't just a corporate screw-up. This was dangerous. If anyone with the right knowledge caught wind of it, the fallout could be brutal. As I walked past HR, my phone buzzed. A message from compliance. "We need you in room 5A at 3.ASCO. I didn't need to ask what it was about. I already knew. I grabbed my folder off my desk, a collection of email logs, access records, and a detailed timeline. Everything I needed to show that I hadn't leaked a damn thing. All I'd done was my job until they told me to stop. It wasn't my fault things had gone off the rails. By 3 I was in room 5A, the fluorescent lights buzzing above me, casting a sterile glow on everything. Ed was already there, standing at the head of the table. His usual cocky confidence had drained right out of him. The room was tense, and I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Compliance was first to speak, their voice flat and businesslike. "We're reviewing some potential breaches, Richard. The Landstone's slides." I cut them off. I didn't leak anything. I was calm. Too calm, maybe, but it didn't matter. I knew exactly where this was going. Ed shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I could see his hands shaking slightly as he flipped through some papers. "We need to figure out how this happened," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, like he was trying to convince himself. "Richard, you've been with us for years. Surely you had access. We need to know where the break happened." His eyes darted nervously between me and the compliance team. He looked cornered. It wasn't just the breach. It was his failure. He'd let Trent handle client IP without verifying access, without understanding the consequences. I watched him try to hold it together, watched his words crack under the pressure. His voice wavered. I didn't know Trent would, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. There was no way around it now. Compliance stayed quiet for a long time, letting the silence settle. Then, they turned their gaze to me. I didn't have to prove anything. I had everything I needed in that folder, everything that showed I hadn't crossed a line. But it didn't matter what I said. They knew. I knew. The trust had been shattered, and once something like that breaks, there's no putting it back together. I left that room knowing exactly what was coming, and as I walked back to my desk, I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take before Ed realized that his son wasn't the golden child he'd thought he was. Maybe then he'd see what I'd been trying to tell him all along. There's a price to pay for ignoring the people who've actually done the work. Monday morning, the executive meeting was already in full swing when I walked in. I wasn't on the agenda, but Naomi, the head of compliance, waved me in anyway. I knew what was coming. The room felt like a pressure cooker. Ed sat at the head of the table, his usual confident posture replaced by something stiff, almost defensive. Trent was next to him, eyes darting around the room like he was trying to calculate an escape route. Legal counsel was flipping through the NDA, the one that Calvin and I had signed, reading it word for word, their face tight. The air in the room was thick with tension. Naomi broke the silence, her voice cool and measured. "There's no gray area here," she said, looking at the general counsel. "Trent breached Clause 4B of the NDA. Ed authorized it." General counsel nodded, pushing his glasses up his nose, giving me that look that said, "You knew this was coming." He didn't say it out loud, but it was there. He'd read the NDA carefully. He knew the consequences, and there was no excuse for what Trent had done. Ed shifted in his seat, his hand running through his hair. "This is a mistake. We can fix it," he said, but his voice was shaky. His usual bravado was nowhere to be found, but it was too late for fixing. The reality had set in. CFO Richard leaned forward, the weight of it all hanging on his shoulders. "This falls under anticipatory breach," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "This is a federal issue." A chill ran through the room. No one could deny it now. This was bigger than a screw-up. This was a breach that could bring down more than just a client relationship. It could bring down careers. Trent finally spoke up, breaking the quiet. "But I didn't know," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, like he was trying to make it sound less like a mistake and more like a misunderstanding. His face was pale, eyes wide with panic. Naomi's expression didn't change. "That's the problem," she replied, her voice sharp and final. No sympathy, no room for excuses. The room fell into an uneasy silence, and then Ed, like a man on autopilot, called for a vote. His hands shook slightly as he scribbled something on his notepad. "We'll place Ed on leave, pending review," someone said. The words hit the table like a hammer. "Trent is barred from all client-facing work until further notice." Then the eyes in the room turned to me. It was almost like they'd forgotten I was even there until that moment. "Richard," Ed asked, his voice tight, "are you staying on?" I didn't hesitate. I stood up, my chair scraping the floor behind me. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair, the leather heavy in my hand, almost like it had weight it didn't deserve. The air felt cooler as I adjusted the sleeves, settling the jacket into place. "No," I said, my voice steady, "but I'll leave a summary of my terms." There was no drama, no argument, no final showdown. Just that, my exit, clean and quiet. I knew exactly what they needed. I had the terms ready. They'd been ready for a while. The elevator ride down was silent. I stood there, letting the hum of the cables and the soft ding of the floors passing by fill the space between me and the chaos I'd left behind. I didn't feel pride. Not really. I wasn't the one who'd fired the shot. They pulled the trigger themselves while holding the manual upside down. Tuesday morning, 7:42 a.m., I opened my inbox and saw an email from Calvin's assistant. The subject line was simple: request for independent contractor engagement. The message was short and to the point. Calvin would like to discuss a confidential advisory role. Please confirm interest. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I made coffee, fed the dog, and stared out the window. The early light was cold and gray, the kind of morning that felt like it was just waiting for something to happen. I didn't feel any rush. I'd been here before, and I knew how things worked. But this time was different. I walked back to my desk and pulled out the backup binder I'd stored at home. It was thick, worn at the edges, and filled with the kind of paperwork I'd kept hidden for years. Inside was Landstone's Appendix D, handwritten notes, and signed term sheets. Everything was still intact. No leaks, no slip-ups. My name still meant something to the people who mattered. It wasn't just about the contract. It was about the trust I'd built, the trust I hadn't lost, no matter how much they tried to write me off. Around noon, I replied to the email, just a short note saying I was open to a conversation. But not under my old firm. I'd be doing it through my own LLC. By 3 p.m., I had a signed contract from Landstone directly. Not through Ed, not through anyone else. Just me. The rate was higher. The hours were flexible. No Trent, no Ed. Just clean work. Done right. The way it should have been all along. That night, I cracked open a cheap beer and heated up a leftover burger. There was no victory lap. No need for one. I didn't have to gloat. I'd already won. The satisfaction wasn't in getting the deal. It was in knowing they had written me off. And I cashed the check they thought they'd kept. It wasn't about the money, really. It was about the clarity, the clean break. The fact that when they tried to push me out, they ended up giving me exactly what I needed.